Well, good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Lidy.
So we will be doing a short interview today, and this will be for the think tank of EABP, where we are working together since 2016. And we decided on making a series of short videos in order to engage the wider community of body psychotherapy in the work we are doing in the think tank committee. And well, we are working together since 2016, as I said. Well, originally we started with seeing each other live once a year for a whole weekend. And well, of course, since last year, we can't do that. And we are meeting virtually a few times a year for a shorter amount of time. Yeah, well, my first question would be, how are you experiencing the work we are doing together in the think tank?
Well, it can be frustrating at times. It can be frustrating trying to get everybody to meet at the same time, and sometimes the conversation veers off in all sorts of directions. But that's inevitable and actually healthy. I think I wouldn't want it to be too focused, over-focused, over-rigorously focused, because it means that things come up that actually nobody was expecting and that turn out to be quite interesting and important. I think for me, what I most want from the think tank is around the really basic question of what actually is body psychotherapy, because EABP is quite a big tent, despite the filters on who can be a member. It still represents a very amorphous and mixed field where nobody's ever actually said, okay, what is it that we're doing? I think more than one question that might arise out of that is, what do we all have in common? But I think what's much more interesting and useful is actually to ask, what do we disagree about? And then we can explore those disagreements and refine them and see what they mean. And I think that's the job that we're trying to do in the think tank, really. I think that's what's come into focus more and more clearly, that we're actually trying to work out what the disagreements are, what the differences are between different versions of body psychotherapy, and how much they matter.
And how do you think it makes the field of body psychotherapy more clear by focusing on the disagreements?
Well, we find out what the reality of the situation is. Once we have a map of what there is in the field, we can start to think about, well, what fits together and what doesn't fit together potentially. I can imagine, this is just a fantasy, but I can imagine ending up with a sense of 2 or 3 blocks of body psychotherapists, all within EABP, but with identified differences of approach, so that our clients could know what they were getting in a rough way, at least. If they approach people in block A or block E or block C, it might work out like that, or it might work out that we all say, no, we agree on something very central. But it'll give us a chance to find out. It'll give us a chance to actually fight out our differences and find our similarities.
So, and in a way, it could be important for the outer world, for clients. That's what you say. And how does it matter for body psychotherapy itself to sort out these things? What's your vision on about that?
Well, I think the most important thing is that it gets us to think in a more precise way about our own practice. Because a lot of what any therapist does is habitual, isn't it? And it's handed down, you know, to some extent we're doing what we were trained in. I think possibly to a larger extent we're doing what our main therapist was doing, or the opposite of it. Um, we don't often have a lot of time to really think about, well, why am I doing this? Is this a conscious choice or just something that I've fallen into over the years? How might I do it differently? One way of increasing that sort of one way of increasing that sort of precision about our work is through things like, you know, external monitoring. But another way is by actually making it interesting to us.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, well, during our work a few years ago, you came up with a way that we could define our field, so to speak, by using the idea of axis on the
Yeah,
field, like a north and a south and a west and an east, in our different ways of working, in our different ways of thinking, our philosophy behind it, etc. So, could you explain a little about your thinking concerning access in the field?
I think it came up in several stages, if I remember rightly. We initially thought that it would be good to identify a range of polarities, the views of different aspects of the field, as you say, theory, practice, meta theory. And we came up with a really long list. We just brainstormed it and we came up with a really long list. I wrote down a few examples. One of them is experience-based practice and evidence-based practice. These are two poles. Another set of poles is therapist as expert and therapist as other in the room, or on a more meta theory level, energy is real or energy is a metaphor. As we know, body psychotherapists talk about energy a great deal, but do we actually mean something that we're claiming is concrete and theoretically measurable, or do we mean, you know, a way of talking about vitality, affect, is another kind of term. So these are just three examples out of a very long list of polarities, which are worth examining.
Yes.
But what we realized is that those polarities are not just an either or. There's a whole gradient in between them, a spectrum of how strongly we veer in one direction or the other direction. So of course, then you have axes rather than simply either or polarities, and axes create the possibility of a field.
Right.
A field within which people can place themselves. So I borrowed an idea that I've seen used in other contexts of using a space like a room and placing one of these axes in the north-south direction, so to speak, and the other axis at right angles to it, and then inviting people to place themselves in the room in terms of where they are on both axes. So if you're hot on one axis and cold on the other, then you'll go over in one corner, if you like.
Yeah.
If you're very hot and cold on the opposite pair, you're in the opposite corner. But of course, most people are roundabout in the middle.
So, and what is the effect of seeing the different positions in the field?
Well, it means we find out if there are clusters, which are generally, I mean, in my limited experience of doing it in practice, we often end up with a majority of people in a cluster. And then it's interesting to think, okay, where is that cluster in terms of each of these axes? What does it mean? What does it represent? But also, there are almost always outliers. So it's very important to find out from the outliers why they're over there and not over with the main bunch and what that signifies.
So it also gives us something to talk further on, you mean?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. And sometimes as we talk, while we're standing in these places, we might actually change our minds a bit and move around. So we can represent our process of thought, our process of being influenced by each other in a physical movement.
So, and it's a real embodied way of discussing, in fact.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Great. So, well, yeah, we plan to bring this further into the association by doing more workshops. You did one with the board 1.5 years ago, I think. So,
Our options have been rather limited over the last
well, at the
year,
moment,
of course.
yes. So, but I mean, society will open at some stage. So we will continue doing these workshops and engaging the wider community of EABP in our discussions in this way. And that's also why we start to do this series of conversation to yeah, to engage people more than the 7 of the committee.
Yes.
But we want to engage the whole EABP in similar discussions.
Yes, and what I think will come out of that is a better sense of which of these axes are really important to people.
Right, yeah. So that we can also use them to, in a sense, define more or less what the field of body psychotherapy is, which is also important to talk to the adjoining fields of, or the adjoining professions, like the medical profession, or, well, whatever you can think of. So we want to keep the interview short so that people can just spend a little time to watch this, and not too long. So I thank you for this interview for now, and we will continue with other couples and other teams that we have discussed so far in our meetings. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Lidy.